I didn't ask the forest to save me. I asked it to finish me, but it answered differently. That sentence sounds dramatic when I say it now, sitting in a warm kitchen, listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant traffic. But that night in the Carpathians, soaked to the bone, shivering so hard my teeth felt loose, I meant every word. I wanted the trees to close over me and erase me like a bad scribble. It started as one of those decisions that look brave on Instagram and idiotic in hindsight. A solo hike in late autumn, before the real snow, to clear my head. I'd told my colleagues I needed a reset after the last project. I told my parents I wanted to reconnect with nature. I told my ex, well, I told her nothing. She'd blocked me months ago. What I didn't tell anyone was that I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Tired of deadlines, of pretending everything was fine, of scrolling through other people's lives while mine shrank into a screen-sized box. So I booked a train, a minibus, and then I walked into the Carpathian forest with a too-heavy backpack and the vague idea that fresh air fixes everything. The morning I set out was almost cheerful, cold, but bright. The beech trees were mostly bare, copper leaves piled on the ground like old coins. Higher up, dark spruce stood like watchmen. I followed the red and white painted markers. I checked them obsessively. Phone in my pocket, power bank full, map downloaded offline. I wasn't stupid, I told myself, just in need of quiet. By midday, clouds rolled over the ridgeline, smearing the sky into a dirty gray. The air grew damp, heavy. I put on my rain jacket, tightened the straps on my pack, and pushed on. The plan was simple: reach a marked shelter before evening, sleep there, descend the next day. 2 days out, then back to emails and fluorescent lights. That was the plan. It began to fall apart with something as small as a piece of plastic. The trail marker was missing. I remember stopping at a fork where the path split into 2 narrow tracks. One dipped gently into a shallow valley. The other climbed along the slope, threading between spruce trunks. I scanned the trees for the familiar red and white painted rectangle. Nothing. I checked my phone. The GPS dot hovered somewhere between the 2 lines on the map, jittering uselessly. Clouds had thickened. Fog smeared the higher branches. It was already dimmer than it should have been. Okay, I muttered. Think. The map suggested the trail should continue upward along the slope, so that's the way I went. It felt right. At least it felt like doing something instead of just standing there. For the next half hour, I kept expecting to see another marker. I didn't. The path grew narrower, then more like a suggestion than a trail. Just flattened grass and occasional hoof prints. When the first drizzle started, tapping on my hood, I told myself I'd see a shelter soon. Instead, I saw nothing. Nothing familiar, at least. Trees, mist, more trees. The valley fell away to my left. The ground rose steeply on my right. The world shrank to 20 meters of wet branches and slippery roots. I checked the map again. The dot had drifted completely off the trail line. Great, I said to the empty forest. Just great. Turning back felt like admitting defeat, but I tried. I followed my own footprints where I could see them, the crushed leaves and broken twigs. The drizzle thickened into rain, and soon the path, whatever it had been, turned into a slick of mud. My tracks washed away under my eyes. By the time I admitted I was lost, I was already deep in it. The light died faster than I expected. One moment it was that murky late afternoon gray. The next, it was like someone had dimmed the world. Shadows filled in between the trees. The rain intensified, sharp and cold. It found ways under my jacket, down my neck, into my boots. Okay, I told myself. Shelter, fire if you can. You've read the survival stuff. You know what to do. Knowledge in your head and knowledge in your hands are not the same thing. I angled downhill, hoping to find a stream, water, a possible valley path, maybe even a cabin if some shepherd was crazy enough to be up here this late in the season. The slope was steeper than it looked. Wet leaves slid under my boots like soap. I grabbed at trunks and branches to steady myself. It happened fast. My right foot hit a slick rock hidden under the leaves. It shot forward. My left leg twisted under me. For a split second, I hung in the air, suspended between balance and disaster. And then my ankle folded sideways with a noise that my stomach turned, and I was rolling. The world blurred into gray and brown. Branches whipped my arms. My backpack hammered my spine. I slammed against something hard. A stump, a buried rock, I don't know, and stopped with a mouthful of wet leaves and a sharp, living pain roaring up my left leg. I don't remember yelling, but the hoarseness in my throat later told me I must have had. For a while, there was only pain. Bright, white, total. It felt like my ankle was full of broken glass and fire. I lay there gasping, rain drumming on my back, cheek pressed to the cold earth. When the edges of the pain blurred enough for thoughts to push through, they came in a frantic rush. Move your toes. Is it broken? Get up. You can't stay here. You'll freeze. Move. I gritted my teeth and tried to pull my leg up. The moment my ankle shifted, lightning shot through my bones. I almost blacked out. Bile rose in my throat. Okay, I breathed. Okay. Slow. It wasn't a clean break, that much I could tell. I could wiggle my toes even if it felt like torture. Probably a bad sprain, maybe a hairline fracture. Useless for walking on steep, slippery ground. The rain didn't care. It just kept falling.
Hypothermia doesn't hit like in the movies. There's no dramatic shudder and collapse. It creeps. First my fingers went numb inside my gloves. Then my jaw started to chatter, uncontrollably, like some ridiculous cartoon. When I tried to unzip my pack, my hands fumbled like they belonged to someone else. I had to get out of the wind and rain. That was priority one. Using my good leg and every upper body muscle I had, I dragged myself toward a cluster of big spruce trees. Their lower branches drooped, almost to the ground, thick with needles. Underneath, the ground was at least less soaked. Each movement pulled at my ankle. Each pull sent waves of pain up my leg and through my skull. Time melted into a series of small, miserable distances. Get to that rock. Now that root. Now that tree. By the time I collapsed under the sweated branches, I was shaking so violently my teeth felt like they might crack. My clothes clung to me, clammy and cold. My breath made little ghosts in the fading air. I dumped my pack, fought the zipper, and pulled out the orange emergency blanket I'd thrown in just in case. Just in case looked a lot like this. I wrapped it around myself, metallic crinkling loud in the muffled forest. Fire, I thought. If you can make a fire, you live. If you can't... Every stick I touched felt wet. I scraped away the top layer of soaked needles and found some drier, dead twigs beneath. My hands shook as I gathered them. My lighter, thank God I had one, flared on the third try. A tiny wavering flame in a world that wanted everything cold. I cupped it under the smallest twigs, breath held. For a moment, nothing. Then the twig caught, blackening, then glowing, then offering a hesitant little lick of fire. I fed it like a baby animal, twig by twig, then a thicker stick, then another. Smoke crawled up, sharp in my nose. My eyes stung. When the fire was finally big enough that I believed it might not die at the next gust of wind, the shaking in my body had dulled to a constant inner tremor. I held my gloved hands as close as I dared, feeling the heat sting my skin. Night finished falling. The forest changed with it.
Sound thinned out. In the daylight there had been bird calls, the occasional crack of a branch, the distant rush of unseen water. Now there was only the hiss of rain and the irregular pop of wet wood in the fire. Once, far off, something howled, too long and high for a dog, too thin for a wolf. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Just wind, I lied to myself. Just the wind in the gullies. My phone said 1843 when I checked it. No signal, battery at 47%. I set it to airplane mode and stuck it in an inner pocket, as if that made any difference to the fact that if anything went truly wrong, no one would know where to find me. The hunger was simple enough, a hollow ache in my stomach. I hadn't eaten since a quick snack at midday. I had food, energy bars, nuts, a bit of dried sausage, but I rationed them without really meaning to, as if the future where I needed them desperately was more real than my present. The thirst was worse. Rainwater I could catch in my bottle off a leaf or jacket fold tasted of resin and cold metal. There was probably a stream nearby. I could hear something like water in the distance, but the thought of crawling away from the fragile circle of firelight made my chest tighten. My ankle throbbed in time with my heartbeat, every pulse a reminder. You really screwed up. The thought lodged itself, and with it came others, faces. My mother's worried look when I'd brushed off her questions, my father's silence, the way he'd just clapped my shoulder, like he knew touch was safer than words, my ex's last message, the one I kept rereading after I blocked me. I hope you figure out what you really want, because right now you're just running. Running. Into the mountains, into a storm, off the trail. The fire hissed as a large drop of water hit it. A shower of sparks leaped up, vanished into the dark. My chest tightened with something that wasn't cold. "What do I really want?" I asked the flames, my voice rough. The answer came back in the silence. "Nothing. You're just tired. You came here hoping something outside would fix something inside." It wasn't a dramatic revelation, just a quiet, heavy truth. I stared into the darkness beyond the fire, where the trees stood like crowded shadows. For the first time since I fell, the idea slipped through my mind that maybe it would be easier to just not try so hard. Not to crawl, not to fight, just lie down, let the cold do what cold does. People die of hypothermia all the time. They say it feels like going to sleep in the end. That's stupid, I told myself. You don't want to die. But the thought didn't recoil in horror the way it should have. It sat there, steady, like a possibility. Do I not? I whispered. The words felt heavier than they should, as if the trees were leaning in to listen. I don't know how long I sat there, wrapped in my crinkling orange cocoon, staring into the dark and into myself. The fire collapsed, flared, collapsed again. My thoughts spiraled. My job, my apartment that always smelled faintly of old takeout, the empty bed, the notifications that never came from the person I wanted them to come from. I'd been saying for months that I was fine. Fine, just stressed. Fine, just busy. Fine, just tired. In that cold, wet circle of light, with no one to impress and no one to reassure, the lie finally cracked. "I'm not fine," I said aloud. My voice startled me. It sounded small and strange under the branches. "I'm done. I don't know how to keep doing this." I straightened slowly, my whole body shaking from something that wasn't just cold. My eyes filled hot and useless. I tilted my head back, looking up at the black lattice of branches in the faint blur of clouds beyond. "I don't care anymore," I called, louder than I meant to. The sound bounced oddly, muffled by the trees. "Do you hear me? I'm tired. If you want me, take me. Just—" My voice broke. "Just take me. I'm done fighting." It wasn't a prayer, exactly. If anything, it was a dare. To the forest. To fate. To whatever indifferent force had shuffled me off the trail.
I expected nothing. What I got was silence. Not just the usual forest quiet. A deeper silence. Like when the power goes out in a city and you suddenly realize how much noise the machines make. The rain slackened, then thinned to a faint mist. The fire popped once, and then burned with a strangely steady flame, no longer hissing at every drop. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with cold. "Hello," I said, immediately feeling ridiculous. Something moved in the darkness beyond the edge of the firelight. Every horror story I'd ever seen crowded into my head. Eyes between trees, pale faces, shadowy figures watching. My heartbeat lurched into my throat. I told myself not to look. I looked. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the fire. The flames cast shifting shadows that made the trunks appear to sway, to lean in and out. But one shape didn't move with the others. It stood just beyond the light, vertical, narrow, human-sized. As my eyes adjusted, the shape took on more detail. A figure. My mind scrambled to assemble it. Long hair, dark and wet, plastered to a thin face. A coat. No, more like an old-fashioned jacket, too big on a narrow frame. Bare legs below the hem, pale feet on the wet leaves. A girl, I thought at first. No, not a girl. Not exactly. Something like one. My first rational thought was that maybe a local had found me, a shepherd's daughter, a lost hiker like myself. But she didn't move like someone picking their way through branches and undergrowth. She seemed simply to be there, as if the forest had grown her. My second thought was that I was hallucinating. We stared at each other. Her face was oddly calm, not smiling, not frowning, eyes too dark to read clearly at that distance. Her hair, though soaked, didn't drip. Her bare feet rested in mud that should have been freezing, and yet she didn't shiver. Who are you?" I managed. She tilted her head, bird-like, as if considering the question. Her eyes flicked to my ankle, to the emergency blanket, to the fire. Then she raised one arm and pointed, away into the darkness. I followed the line of her hand. Between the trees, partially hidden by brush, I caught a glimpse of an overhang, like a small cave. I hadn't seen it before, though it couldn't have been more than 30 meters away. Is that shelter?" I swallowed. She didn't nod, didn't speak, just kept pointing. I blinked, wiped at my eyes, looked again. She was still there. "Right," I muttered to myself. "You're cold, injured, and you've barely eaten. Of course you're seeing barefoot girls in the forest." But the overhang was real. That much I could verify with my own eyes. My fire was dying down again. The smoke stung. If that cave was drier, it was worth dragging myself over there, even if the girl was nothing but my brain misfiring. "I'm going," I told the figure, as if I owed her an explanation. She lowered her arm slowly. Her hand hung at her side, fingers long and still. I packed my things as best I could, tossing them back into the pack with clumsy hands. I left a few half-burned pieces of wood on the fire, hoping it would last until I got the new spot set up. Then I began the crawl. Each meter was agony. My ankle screamed with every bump. The earth was uneven, littered with rocks and roots. By the time I reached the overhang, sweat mingled with the cold rain on my face. The space beneath the rock was small but blessedly dry. Someone had used it before. There were blackened stones in a shallow circle, old ash, a bit of charred wood. This spot had seen other fires, other cold nights. I looked back toward the trees, wanting to call out a thank you, or a curse, or anything at all. The girl was gone. The forest stood blank and dark. A rational person would say she'd never been there, that I glimpsed shadow and fog, that my tired brain had painted a face on it. A rational person would say a lot of things sitting at a comfortable desk later. At that moment, staring at the emptiness where she had been, I felt only a strange, uneasy gratitude. "Fine," I muttered. "Be that way." I rebuilt the fire in the old stone circle. This time, under the rock, the wood caught easier. The smoke curled up and licked the underside of the overhang, staining the stone. I spread my emergency blanket on the ground, lay on it, and curled into a trembling ball. Exhaustion dragged at me with heavy hands, but just before sleep pulled me under, I remembered my phone. If there was any chance of a signal, I should try. I fumbled it out, woke the screen. 2112. Battery 39%, no service. I hesitated, then did something stupid. I switched on the camera. I pointed it toward the forest, toward where the girl had stood. My thumb trembled as I snapped a photo. The flash burst white against the trees, painting everything in stark, momentary detail. The trunks leapt forward, branches etched in shadow. The darkness beyond seemed to flinch. I blinked spots out of my eyes. Then checked the photo. Trees, wet leaves, my dying fire in the foreground, the smear of orange. No figure. I swallowed. Took another shot. This time toward the entrance of the overhang, just in case she was standing closer now, watching me with that unfazed gaze. I checked again. Nothing. My hams shook harder. From cold, I told myself. From cold. I turned the phone off and buried it deep in my jacket. This time, when sleep came, I didn't resist it. The night folded over me like a second blanket.
When I woke, the world had changed again. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The stone above me loomed, damp and close. The fire had burned down to coals, a faint red glow in the ash. My body felt like one big bruise. My ankle throbbed. Outside the overhang, a faint pearly light seeped into the trees. The rain had stopped. When I dragged myself to the edge of the shelter and looked out, I saw that the forest was wrapped in a thin white veil. Snow. Not much, just a dusting, a delicate layer on the leaves and branches, but enough to change the look of everything, enough to turn the world into something cleaner and sharper and more indifferent. My breath hung in front of me. The air was colder now, but dry, better than yesterday's soaking chill. I swallowed a few sips of water, forcing myself to drink before I felt truly thirsty. Ate half an energy bar, each bite turning to paste in my mouth. My stomach growled angrily, then quieted. The practical part of my mind took stock. Ankle? Bad, but not completely unusable. I could put a little weight on it if I gritted my teeth hard enough. Walking was out of the question, but hobbling with a stick might be possible. Supplies. Enough food for maybe 2 days if I rationed hard. Water. As long as I had snow and a pot, I could melt it over the fire. Phone. Still no signal, as far as I knew. Battery. Not infinite. Location? Unknown. Lost in the Carpathian forest in late autumn, injured. The situation looked bad, but not hopeless. Yet. I told myself I'd wait until full daylight, then find a higher point. Not far, just enough to maybe catch a phone signal. I'd build a bigger fire, a smoky one, in case any rescuers were nearby.
People would notice I was missing eventually, right? The guest house owner, the driver who dropped me off at the trailhead. People vanish in these mountains, a quieter part of my mind whispered. They find them months later, after the snow melt, or never. I shut that voice up and forced myself to stand. Pain exploded up my leg, but I stayed upright, leaning heavily on the rock wall. My vision went gray around the edges, then cleared. Sweat broke out on my forehead despite the cold. Okay, I breathed, one step at a time, literally. I found a sturdy branch nearby. Someone had left it against the rock, probably as a walking stick. It felt almost too convenient. I tried not to think about that as I tested it, leaning some of my weight on it and hobbling a few meters. Each step was a negotiation between pain and necessity. As I shuffled through the thin layer of snow, something caught my eye. Footprints. Not mine. Mine were a mess of boot prints around the overhang, deep and irregular. These were something else. Long, narrow impressions in the snow, toes splayed slightly, heel rounded. Bare feet. They led away from the overhang, into the trees. The snow inside each print looked wrong. Not compacted and icy as I would have expected, but almost untouched, as if the foot had passed without weight. My skin crawled. Animals, I said out loud. A fox or something. You're not a tracker, you don't know what you're seeing. But I knew enough to recognize that wild animals don't leave human-shaped bare footprints. The prints continued between the spruce trunks, a pale breadcrumb trail. They zigzagged, avoiding rocks and sudden drops, winding around patches of thicker underbrush. They were heading uphill, toward where I'd planned to go anyway. I stood there, leaning on my stick, staring at them. There is a point where coincidence begins to feel like something else. Fine, I muttered. Lead on then. I followed. The climb was agony, but mindless agony, the kind where you can stop thinking and just focus on the next step. Plant stick, shift weight, drag bad leg, repeat. Each footprint became a short-term goal, just get to that one, then the next. Every so often, the prints vanished where the snow thinned, then reappeared higher up. Once they skirted the edge of a narrow ravine I might have walked straight into had I been moving on my own. The bottom was filled with dark rocks and patches of old ice. You're projecting, I told myself. Coincidence. You're following a path that any sensible person would take. The part of me that still remembered the girl in the rain said nothing. It didn't need to. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, the trees thinned. The slope leveled into a small clearing, a kind of saddle between two rises. The sky cracked open above, pale and low. A weak sun sat behind the clouds like a smudged coin. I limped to the center of the clearing, breathing hard. My ankle felt like it was filled with nails. I lowered myself onto a fallen log, sweat cooling on my neck. There on my screen, above the little bars that had stubbornly stayed empty since yesterday, was a miracle. One thin bar of service. It flickered, weak, threatening to disappear if I moved wrong. My hands shook as I turned airplane mode off, as I opened the phone app. The battery icon glared at me, 27%. Who do you call when you might only get one chance? I'd saved the local mountain rescue number before I'd set out, telling myself it was just in case. I found it now, a dry sequence of digits that suddenly looked like a lifeline and a loaded gun at once. If the call dropped midway, if the battery died, they might not get enough to find me. I swallowed, hit dial, and held my breath.
The phone rang. Once, twice, then a click, a voice, distorted slightly by distance and bad connection. "Mountain Rescue? What is your emergency?" For a second, I couldn't speak. Tears burned my eyes. Unexpected. "I'm lost," I managed. "In the Carpathians, somewhere above—" I had to think, dragging the name up through layers of panic. Above Yashina. I fell, hurt my ankle. I gave them everything. When I'd set out, my planned route, where I thought I might have left the trail.
The line crackled. The rescuer's voice stayed calm, steady, like an anchor. "Okay," he said when I finished. "We have your number. Keep your phone on if you can. We'll try to triangulate. Don't waste battery. Can you move?" "Not far," I admitted. "There's a small clearing, some kind of saddle." "That's good," he said. "Stay there if you can. Build a fire, make smoke. We'll start from your trailhead and work our way up. It may take some hours. Don't wander. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. My throat was tight. "Thank you." The line went dead. For a moment, I sat there, phone pressed to my chest, listening to my own ragged breathing and the soft hush of wind through the trees. Then a voice spoke behind me. "You finally told the truth." I jerked around, almost dropping the phone. She stood at the edge of the clearing, just where the trees began again. Same long hair, same too big jacket, same bare feet. In the daylight, she looked both more real and more wrong. Her skin had that faint, translucent quality of someone who hadn't seen sun in a very long time, or ever. Her lips hadn't moved when I heard the words, or maybe they had and I just hadn't noticed. The voice seemed to come from the air itself, from the branches and the stones and the snow. What truth?" I croaked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she took a few steps closer. Her feet didn't leave prints this time. The snow remained untouched under them. A chill skated up my spine. "You said you were done," she said, or the forest said through her. "Done pretending you want to keep running in circles. Done lying." I swallowed. My mouth tasted of metal. "I said I was done," I agreed. "Does that mean you're here to finish the job?" To my surprise, she smiled. It was a small, almost sad smile, nothing like the sharp, hungry grins of horror stories. "If that was what you wanted," she said, "you wouldn't have followed me." I started, then stopped. I had followed the footprints, the shelter, the trail. I had called for help the instant I had a signal. "For someone who says he wants to die," she said softly, "you have a stubborn way of choosing life." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they landed on something raw and exposed. "Maybe," I said slowly, "I didn't really want to die. I just didn't know how to keep living the way I was." She tilted her head again, as if listening not to me but to something behind me. "That," she said, "is a different kind of tired." I let out a shaky breath. "What are you? Are you real?" She considered that. "Does it matter?" she asked eventually. It was an annoying answer, the kind that would have driven me crazy in any other situation. Now, though, it felt weirdly appropriate, like the mountain itself shrugging. "I want to know if I'm losing my mind." She stepped closer. In the gray light, I could see the faint outline of veins under her skin, the way her hair clumped from the wet. Her eyes were dark, but not empty. They were full of something I couldn't name. "Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. Maybe," she said, "when you stopped talking over yourself with all your explanations and performances, something else had space to answer.
Something else, I repeated. Like what? Spirits? Angels? My subconscious? She smiled again. Call it what you like. It doesn't change what you have to do next. And what is that? I asked. Survive, she said simply. And when you go back, don't pretend you never ended up here. Don't go back to sleep. I looked down at my shredded, swollen ankle, at my shaking hands, at the thin line of my phone battery. I'll try, I said. She nodded, once, solemnly. That's all we ever ask. We? I echoed.
But she was already fading. Not dramatically, not in a swirl of mist. Just less. As if someone was turning down the contrast on a screen. The clarity of her edges softened. Her colors seeped into the background. Wait, I said, more sharply than I intended. Will you see me again? Her voice was very faint now, like wind moving through dry grass. Only if you stop listening to yourself again, she said, and call out to the forest for the wrong reason. Then she was gone. The clearing looked exactly like any other piece of winter forest. If it weren't for the lack of footprints and the warmth on the side of my face where the wind had briefly stopped touching me while she stood there, I could have convinced myself I'd dreamed her. I didn't bother taking a photo. They found me 2.5 hours later. I heard them before I saw them. The faint buzz of a drone first, then the distant calls, men's voices in the trees. I built the smoky fire like they'd told me, feeding it wet branches so the gray column rose above the canopy. When the first rescuer stepped into the clearing, orange jacket bright against the muted forest, my chest constricted. You chose a good place to wait, he said, as he checked my ankle. We saw your smoke from below. He and his partner splinted my leg, wrapped me in a thicker, real rescue blanket, and rigged a stretcher to drag me downhill. As they worked, I saw another rescuer pause at the edge of the clearing, frowning. Something wrong? I asked, half dizzy with relief and exhaustion. He scratched his head. No, just weird. We followed some tracks up from the ravine, thought they were yours at first, but they looked like bare feet. Then they just stopped. Strange, eh? I looked past him to where the girl had stood and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. Yeah, I said. Strange. On the way down, jostled on the stretcher, I dozed and woke in fragments. Bits of conversation drifted over me. One of the rescuers mentioned an old story about a forester who died saving tourists in a blizzard decades ago. Another laughed it off as campfire nonsense. In the hospital later, ankle in a cast, IV in my arm, I went through my phone. Photos of the trail, of cheerful trees before the weather turned, 2 blown-out, overexposed shots from under the overhang that showed nothing but trees and my fire. No blurry figures, no impossible footprints. If you ask me now what I believe, I'd tell you I don't know. Maybe I hallucinated a girl and followed my own survival instincts, dressed up as something more poetic. Maybe the Carpathians still keep old guardians in their ravines and hollow stones, spirits that step in when a stubborn fool finally drops his armor and says honestly that he's lost. All I know is this. When I was ready to give up, the forest answered. Not by killing me, not by storm or falling branch or silent acceptance. It answered by showing me that beneath the part of me that wanted to disappear was another part, fierce and quiet, that wanted to live. That part borrowed the face of a barefoot girl in an oversized coat, or woke up an old mountain ghost, or simply stepped out from behind all my excuses. I went into the mountains thinking they might fix me. They didn't. What they did was strip away everything I'd been hiding behind, until there was just me, shivering and exhausted, and the truth I'd been avoiding. I didn't really want to die. I just didn't know how to live honestly. The day I left the hospital, I stood for a long time at the edge of a small city park. The trees there were tame, nothing like the Carpathian giants, but their branches still whispered things when the wind moved through them. "Thank you," I said quietly, feeling a little foolish. A leaf detached itself from a branch and spiraled down, landing on my cast. Coincidence, probably. Probably. I brushed the leaf off and took my first careful, painful step down the path toward home. The forest had answered when I asked to die. Now it was my turn to answer by learning how to live.